Hi. Do the scriptures advocate mutual submission in marriage? This is what Grudem is going to answer in this section of his chapter, Wives Like Sarah and Husbands Who Honor Them. It's chapter 10 of this publication, Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. So here is what Grudem comments. In order to avoid the force of any command that would tell wives to be submissive to their husband's authority, evangelical feminists frequently talk about mutual submission within marriage. The phrase itself is slippery because it can mean different things. On the one hand, it can mean simply that husbands and wives are to be thoughtful and considerate toward one another and put each other's interests and preferences before their own. If people use the phrase to apply to such mutual consideration and deference, then they are speaking of an idea that is fully consistent with the teachings of the New Testament, and that still allow for a unique leadership role for the husband and a unique responsibility for the wife to submit to his authority or leadership. Mutual submission would then mean that a husband is to be unselfish in his exercise of leadership in the family, and the wife is to be unselfish in her submission to and support of that leadership. Usually, Ephesians 5:21, which says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, is claimed to support this view. First, they fail to account for the fact that while wives are told several times in the New Testament to submit to their husbands, the situation is never reversed. Husbands are never told to submit to their wives. Why? In fact, it is very significant that the New Testament authors never explicitly tell husbands to submit to their wives. The command that a husband should submit to his wife would have been highly unusual in that male-dominated culture. And if the New Testament writers had thought Christian marriage requires husbands to submit to their wives, they certainly would have had to say so very clearly in their writings. Otherwise, no early Christians ever would have known that that was what they should do. It is surprising that evangelical feminists can find this requirement in the New Testament when it is nowhere explicitly stated, with the possible exception of Ephesians 5:21, to which we now turn. As for Ephesians 5:21, the misunderstanding comes when the verse is read apart from its context, which shows what Paul intends. He goes on to explain that he means that wives are to be subject to authority of their husbands, verses 22 to 24. Children to parents, chapter 6, 1 to 3, and servants to masters, 6, verses 4 to 8. In each case, Paul tells those in authority how they are to act, in love and thoughtfulness and fairness. Ephesians 5:25 to 33 and 6, 4 and 9. But he does not tell them to submit to their wives, children, or servants, respectively. Second, evangelical feminists take another illegitimate step in Bible interpretation when they change the meaning of the word, and I'm not going to try and say the Greek here. Submit to is the word they're talking about. Be subject to. That's the translation of that word. giving it a meaning that it nowhere requires something like be thoughtful and considerate, act in love toward another, without any sense of obedience to an authority. This is not a legitimate meaning for the term, which always implies a relationship of submission to an authority. It is used elsewhere in the New Testament of the submission of Jesus to the authority of his parents, of demons being subject to the disciples. Clearly, Luke 10:17, it says, clearly the meaning act in love, be considerate cannot fit here. Demons to the disciples. Okay, of citizens being subject to governing authorities. Romans 13:1 and verse 5, and Titus 3:1 and 1 Peter 2:13. Of the universe being subject to Christ. 1 Corinthians 15:27, Ephesians 1:22. Of unseen spiritual powers being subject to Christ. 1 Peter 3:22. Of Christ being subject to God the Father. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 28. Of church members being subject to church leaders. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 15 and 16. And 1 Peter 5, verse 5. Of wives being subject to their husbands. Colossians 3:18 and Titus 2, verse 5. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 5, and Ephesians 5:22 to 24. Of the church being subject to Christ, Ephesians 5:24. Of servants being subject to their masters, Titus 2 to verse 9 and 1 Peter 2, verse 18. And of Christians being subject to God, Hebrews 12:9 and James 4, verse 7. Note that none of these relationships is ever reversed. That is, husbands are never told to be subject to wives, nor governments to citizens, masters to servants, disciples to demons, etc. In fact, the term is used outside the New Testament to describe the submission and obedience of soldiers in an army to those of superior rank. And that is from Josephus, Jewish War, and a few other references they give. Okay, more comments here. In an age when submission to authority is frequently denigrated and thought to be degrading and dehumanizing, Peter's words remind us that submission to rightful authority is beautiful and right in God's world. It is for the Lord's sake that Christians are to be subject to God-ordained authorities, whether in civil government, in employment, in the family, or in the church. Then his final sentence in his portion here, I thought was worth reading as well. He says, to take the time to maintain a good marriage is God's will. It is serving God. It is a spiritual activity pleasing in His sight. So I liked the fact that he calls this serving God, maintaining a good marriage. It is a spiritual activity. Don't divide life up as if raising children, having a good home is not part of your service to God. I think we need to be reminded of that coming from a witness background, a Watchtower teaching that would not make you think that this was service to God in the sense of equal importance or even higher importance than what they say you should be doing, their door-to-door work. I'm going to link something that's more of a humorous take on family life. This is based on a video from C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. So this is Screwtape, the senior devil, and his take on family life. So it's called Build Up a Good Settled Habit of Mutual Annoyance and Daily Pinpricks. So I just thought we needed a little humor too. Thanks for watching.